Good evening. Hello, everyone. I am back for day two. So recap on yesterday. So we looked at the UI, looked at movement, viewport settings, and moving and creating objects. So moving on today, we will look at post-process and camera exposure, and dive into some materials. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So what I might do is I might flick across this scene here and see what Unreal Sensei's got to say to start off with.
It's time to move on to the post-process volume. So we're going to go over how we can change the settings of our viewport camera, specifically exposure.
I just realized he's got a loose hair.
While in the process of creating our first level, you might have noticed that if we zoom into the shadows, we see our screen gets brighter and brighter and brighter. And then when we zoom out, our screen gets darker. So that is auto exposure. And what exposure is trying to do is that it's trying to mimic the way our eyes work. So for example, if you've ever been in a very dark room and you decide to jump out into the daylight, you could feel your eyes start to hurt and everything is really bright, but slowly over time your eyes start to adjust until everything comes into focus. And that is exactly what Unreal Engine is trying to mimic by brightening our screen and darkening our screen. So I think we can create a better example by duplicating this map and creating a little house. So to do so, let's press Control and Space to go into our content drawer. And I want to duplicate.
All right. So what we're going to do, I'll just flick over to the main menu. So Control and Space. Right. So we got the thing moving up.
Minimal underscore default, which is right now located in starter content and maps. So right here is the current level that we have. There's a little asterisk right next to it, and that tells us that it needs to be saved. So press Control S to save the level, and to duplicate the level, simply press Control and D to duplicate. Now let's go rename this to post process example, and let's go save it. So if I double click on minimal underscore default, this is the current map that we've been on. And then if I double click on post process example, this is the new map that we're about to edit. Now notice that our grid is pretty large right now. That's because we have our snapping set to 100. We can make the grid squares smaller by setting this back to 10 as its default. So now our grid is a little bit smaller, or you can press G to hide all those editor widgets. Now I want to start deleting all these objects. So simply select an object and delete it to get rid of it. And here is a little tip. If I go into the outliner, since I do want to delete all these chairs, I could hold down Control and select each chair individually, or I can select the first chair.
All right. Oh, hang on. Undo element.
At the very top of the list, hold down Shift and select the last one, and then it'll select everything in between. So Control is to select individual objects, and hold down Shift is to select a row of objects, and press Delete. Now let's create a little hut. So I'm going to come up to Add, and hold down the left mouse button on Cube to add in a very simple cube. Keep in mind that this is just for...
All right, hang on. Whoa up. Less basic. There we go. If we go end, sweet. Kind of getting used to using the controller. Hang on, I'll just change that. All right.
Demonstrations to show exposure. So this won't be the best. Hold down Alt. Let's go duplicate this wall. And hold down Alt again. Press E, and I want to make sure snapping is turned on so I can rotate this exactly 90 degrees right there. Hold down Alt again and drag it out just like this. So hold on.
All right, let's do that. So we are going to go to that one there. Let's move that along. That one there. Move it up. Move it across. What are we doing? We're doing Alt. There. Oh, there. We are doing like that. We want to move it. I want to move maybe that one. I want to select that one again. And hang on. Go Alt. There's a bit of a cube.
Alt, rotate this as a roof. And I do want a slight opening so that the sun can come through and illuminate the inside of this hut.
Okay, all right. So we're doing another one. We want to snap it. 90. Cool beans.
Right here, like that. So now, notice that if I zoom in on this and go inside the hut, we can see our screen get brighter and brighter and brighter. And then as soon as I fly out, our screen gets darker. So when I go inside, our eyes adjust. It gets lighter so that we can see exactly what is inside the hut. And then if I zoom outside, our eyes get darker. Now, this can be annoying if you are building out worlds. So to turn it off and to lock your screen to a certain brightness, we could come up to lit and all the way down here under exposure, uncheck game settings. Now we have a constant brightness that even if I go inside the hut, we see that our screen isn't getting darker. Now, right underneath game settings, we have EV100. If I bring this down, our screen gets brighter. And if I bring this up, our screen gets darker.
Yeah, okay,
so
cool.
we can leave it at 0 for now. Now, there is just one issue, and that is this change doesn't apply to gameplay. To play the game, come up to the toolbar and click on the play icon. Now we are currently in game. But if we, let's say, go into the hut, we see auto exposure is turned on since our screen gets brighter, and when I leave, the screen gets darker. On a side note, if you want to stop playing the game, press the escape key to exit out. Maybe this is what you want. When you're building out your world, you have a constant exposure, and then when you're in game, you have auto exposure turned on. But if you do want to edit the exposure directly in game, this is where post-process volumes come in handy. Now, we won't be able to see the exposure changes with the post-process volume with game settings turned off. So come up to lit and make sure game settings is turned on again. And within the outliner, by default, we will have a global post-process volume for this map.
Yeah, okay,
so
there
with
we
the
go.
post-process volume selected within the outliner, we see that we have a drop-down called exposure, and we have exposure compensation.
Hang
Now,
on,
in
whoa
order
up.
to edit
Whoa up. Hang on, where did he go?
play icon. Now we are currently in game. But if we, let's say, go into the hut, we see auto exposure is turned on since our screen gets brighter. And when I leave, the screen gets darker. On a side note, if you want to stop playing the game, press the escape key to exit out. Maybe this is what you want. When you're building out your world, you have a constant exposure, and then when you're in game, you have auto exposure turned on. But if you do want to edit the exposure directly in game, this is where post-process volumes come in handy.
His
Now,
screen
you
is
won't
a
be able
lot
to
brighter
see
than
the
mine.
exposure changes with the post-process volume with game settings turned off, so come to lit and make sure game settings is turned on again. And within the outliner, by default, we will have a global post-process volume for this map. So with the post-process volume selected within the outliner,
Yeah.
we see that we have a drop down called exposure and we have exposure compensation.
All right, so there's something here. Foliage, navigation, VR, audio, tick. Details. Ah, yeah, okay, so we're in details.
Now, in order to edit any of these properties, you want to make sure that they are turned on first, and then we're able to adjust exposure, but auto exposure is still turned on right now. So what we can do is select metering mode, and instead of auto exposure histogram, select manual. Now we control exactly what our exposure is with
Yeah,
the exposure
okay.
compensation. So if we leave it at 9, press play again, we see that we don't have any auto exposure in game. So you might be wondering exactly what the post-process volume is. Well, the post-process volume is a great way to add some effects after everything has been rendered. So the post-process volume only affects our camera. For example, maybe we want some more bloom, so we select
Yeah,
bloom, and right
okay.
now the
So
intensity is
this
at
does just does
0.675.
camera.
I can boost this up all the way to, let's say, 8. And maybe if I want the default values back, instead of trying to guess what the default values are, I could come over here and select that backwards arrow, which will set everything back to its default value. We also have a bunch of other settings. For example, under image effects, we can add a very strong vignette. So right now it's at 0.4. We can bring this up all the way to 1. So there's a lot of darkening around the sides of the camera. Or we can completely turn off vignettes by bringing it down to 0. So by default, Unreal does have a little bit of vignettes
There
with
we
it being
go.
at 0.4. We can also go down here and change some of the color grading. So maybe if I select saturation, I can move the wheel around. We see just a little bit of changes. I can even boost the saturation down here. So instead of 1, drag this up. And now we have a really vibrant and saturated scene. And of course I can uncheck this to get rid of that change. So if you want, there are a ton of different settings. You can go through and see what all of them are. But you might be wondering, how do I create a post-process volume?
Well, there we go. Yeah, that's a fair bit in there. A fair bit in there.
If I don't have it inside of our world. So to begin, I'm going to press G key to bring back all of our editor widgets, select the post-process volume, and let's delete it. So we can go
Which
over how to
one was
create
it?
post-process
Which one was
volume
it?
and change some of the color grading. So maybe
There's going to be a
if I
lot of
select
backwards and
saturation,
forwards
I can
while we
move
learn.
the
But
wheel
hey,
around. We see just a little bit of changes. I can even boost the saturation down here. So instead of 1, drag this up. And now we have a really vibrant and saturated scene. And of course I can uncheck this to get rid of that change. So if you want, there are a ton of different settings. You can go through and see what all of them are. But you might be wondering, how do I create a post-process volume if I don't have it inside of our world? So to begin, I'm going to press G key to bring back all of our editor widgets, select the post-process volume, and let's delete it. So we can go over how to create a post-process volume from scratch.
there we go.
Of course, we're going to select the add button. It's going to be under volumes. Down here, we have post-process volume. So simply drag this into our world, and we see that we have a little square.
So plus into volumes. Post-processing volume. So onto there. There we go. Done.
So let's make a very quick change. So the change I want to make is down here within globals and saturation. Instead of 1, I'm going to change this to 0. But we notice that there are no changes to our camera right now. That's because the post-process volume, by
0?
default, only affects whatever is inside the post-process volume. So if we
Yeah,
move
okay.
into the cube, we can see those changes taking into effect. And right now, by changing global saturation, bringing it down all the way to 0, it gives us a black and white world. Now, what if I want this post-process volume to affect our entire world? Well, scroll all the way down here, and under infinite extent unbound, make sure that's turned on. So that's how we don't have to be within the post-process volume for that post-process.
Where did he go? Too fast, too fast.
But we notice that there are no changes to our camera right now. That's because the post-process volume, by default, only affects whatever is inside the post-process volume. So if we move into the cube, we can see those changes taking into effect. And right now, by changing global saturation, bringing it down all the way to 0, it gives us a black and white world. Now, what if I want this post-process volume to affect our entire world? Well, scroll all the way down here, and under infinite extent unbound, make sure that's turned on. So that's how we don't have to be within the post-process volume. Now it's time to go over materials. But
no,
do keep
didn't go back
of that change. So if you want, there are a ton of different settings. You can go through and see what all of them are. But you might be wondering, how do I create a post-process volume if I don't have it inside of our world?
I need to collapse a lot of that
G key to bring back all of our editor widgets, select the post-process volume, and let's delete it so we can go over how to create a post-process volume from scratch. Of course, we're going to select the add button. It's going to be under volumes.
Yeah, cool.
Down here, we have post-process volume. So simply drag this into our world, and we see that we have a little square. So let's make a very quick change. So the change I want to make is down here within globals and saturation. Instead of 1, I'm going to change this to 0.
We got that.
But we notice that there are no changes to our camera right now.
Can't really see it because of my camera.
Volume, by default, only affects whatever is inside the post-process volume. So if we move into the cube, we can see those changes taking into effect. And right now, by changing global saturation, bringing it down all the way to 0,
pause this at the right
it
time.
gives us a black and white world. Now, what if I want this post-process volume to affect our entire world? Well, scroll all the way down here, and
post-process. Okay, so it's in post-process volume settings.
under infinite extent unbound, make sure that's turned on. So that's how we don't have to be
there we go.
Post-process volume for that post-process volume to take effect. Now it's time to go over materials, but do keep in mind that materials can be a little bit complicated.
All right, hang on. We'll change back now. Yeah, I do need to make a note of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start like a Word document. New. So post-processing volume. Select what is it? Infinite extent unbound in post-process volume settings for post-process volume be applied to, I'm going to call it the whole scene. I I think that's what we'll call it. Just realized the Hobbit documents would have come up in the previous saves, but anyway, hey, such is life. All right, so now we're on to materials. Right monitor.
Especially if you're brand new to 3D art. So, if you do find yourself a little bit lost throughout this course, do keep in mind that you can always go back in a section and rewatch it.
We certainly can.
To demonstrate materials, I want to create a brand new map. So to do so, let's create a folder where we're going to store all the assets we create.
All right, hang on. So yeah, we want to go main monitor. Let's collapse that.
So I want this folder to be under content, right next to the starter content folder. Right click,
and
select a new folder. I'm going to call this folder my stuff.
Hang on. So what did he go? What did he do?
For content folder, right click and select a new folder. I'm going to call this folder my stuff and double click to go inside of it. Now to create a level, I could right click and under create basic assets, select a level, but I want to use a level template since this would
can I rename? Yeah. If I could spell. All right, so we go on here.
We'll just create a completely blank level. So to use level templates, you want to come up to File, New Level.
File, New Level.
And you can select Open World or Basic. I'm going to select Basic. And now we have a pretty basic level. It's just the floor right here and the sky. Now, in order to save this level in a specific location in our content browser, you need to press Ctrl and S. And it's going to ask us where we want to save this level. Select.
All right, so Ctrl and S. My stuff.
To my stuff. And let's call this one Material Example Level. And then select Save. Now, pressing Ctrl and Space to bring up my content drawer, we can see that under my stuff, our level is saved. So if we ever want to go back into this level, I just have to double click and we will open up that level. Now, I do want to make some adjustments. If we zoom in on the floor, we can see that our grid is showing through and it's right on top of the floor. Now, this grid will be distracting when we're showing off materials. So I'm going to come up to Show and uncheck the grid to hide it. That's all we see is
bit by bit. So grid. Okay, there we go.
The floor material. Also, I think this floor is a little bit too big for our purposes. So I could use R and hover in between the Y and X axis to then scale it down like this. Or alternatively, within the details panel of this floor, I can set it to 1 in the X axis, 1 in the Y axis, and 1 in the Z axis.
Hang on. So world settings. So floor details. Transform. Where is it? All. All right, here we go. So 1, 1, 1. And we go F. There we go. F for frame.
To give us a
handy as hell.
I also want to add in an object to place our materials on top of. And we can do so by pressing Ctrl and Space. And Unreal actually comes with a bunch of assets and objects by default. So this is content that is not located in starter content. Instead, it's located in the engine folder. And if you don't see your engine folder right here, that's because you need to come to settings and make sure show engine content is enabled. Now we get access to all of Unreal's default content that is contained in every single project.
Yeah,
so
sweet.
let's go into content and I believe it is under engine meshes, and it's specifically SM_map preview mesh.
Hang on. Engine meshes. Which one's he looking at?
Now we can also select engine and type in SM_mat to bring up that asset.
Okay,
so we drag
SM.
it into our world.
Which is that one there. Cool beans.
And let's rotate it 90 degrees. And we can rotate it 90 degrees exactly by making sure snapping is enabled up here.
Oh.
Now I also want to control the exposure, since if we zoom in on the shadows and zoom out, we can see that auto exposure is enabled right now. So let's create a post process volume by going to volumes, post process, simply dragging it out.
So what are we doing? So we're doing post-processing volumes. Post-process volumes. We drag it out. Uh-huh. Ah, yeah, that's a Q&A. There we
I
go.
want this to affect the entire world, not just whatever is inside this box. So scroll down and make sure infinite extend bound is turned on.
Yeah,
now,
cool.
If we go up here under exposure, make sure metering mode is set to
Hang on. Up here to exposure.
manual instead of auto, and exposure compensation. We can bring this up. I found a
All right. Manual. There we go.
value of 11 to be pretty good. Now, as
I
a
had
reminder,
10.6.
if your exposure isn't changing from your post-process
That wasn't
volume,
too bad.
you need to make sure that in lit game setting is turned on, because otherwise it's going to default to EV100 setting right here as the exposure amount. So make sure game views turned
Let's just double check. Yeah, cool. Game value is on.
on. That's how we're using post-process volume. And since I do like my scene right now, you want to make sure to save everything with Control and S. And actually, I think I'm going to bring down my exposure to, let's leave it at 10.5. So now it's finally time to go over materials. And adding a material to your world is actually pretty simple. So press Control Space, and luckily starter content comes with a bunch of materials by default.
All right, so starter content, we want to kind of collapse that.
Under the materials folder. So let's double click into materials, and we see we have a bunch of materials that we can use. So to add a material to our world, you want to simply hold down the left mouse button and drag it until you're hovering over whatever object you want this material to be placed on, and let go. It is that simple. So now we have a brick
There
floor.
we go. Easy enough.
Or for example, to make this object steel, I can drag a steel material onto the object and let go. We can even add grass right there like this.
Yeah, there you
See
go.
the reflections updates on the metal right there whenever we are switching our different materials.
Yeah, easy.
Cool. So let's select the grass. And I do actually want to make this just a little bit bigger. So let's scale it in X and Y axis like this. And I think the screen is too bright. So I'm going to bring its exposure compensation down to 10.25.
Hey.
So that's the basics of adding a material to our world. What if we want to create or edit a material? Well, to create a material is also pretty simple. It's just like creating a level. Press Control and Space and come into My Stuff, where we're going to create our
My Stuff.
Material. Right click, and under Create Basic Asset, select Material, and let's call this First.
Hang on. Right click, Create. Did he just go new.
And I do actually want to make this just a little bit bigger. So let's
Yeah,
scale
I'm
it
all
in
good.
the
I'm all
X and
good.
Y axis like this. And I think the screen is too bright. So I'm going to bring its exposure compensation down to 10.25. So that's the basics of adding a material to our world. What if we want to create or edit a material? Well, to create a material is also pretty simple. It's just like creating a level. Press Control and Space and come into My Stuff where we're going to create our material.
Yeah.
Right click and under Create Basic Asset, select Material and let's call this First Material. And press Enter and double click on it to open up the Material Editor. First off, before we go over any of these settings, you'll notice that my window is right now floating. So something I like to do with all my editor windows is to hold down the left mouse button on the tab and then dock it up here just like this. That's how really quickly I could switch in between my main level view and any of my editor views. So in the middle, we have the material graph. Essentially, what the material graph does is basically we have a bunch of nodes that connect to each other, and their end goal is to eventually be outputted into one of these outputs right here, which will create the actual material. Now,
so right click is to move
to the controls of our viewport when in orthographic view mode. So hold down the right mouse button to pan, and then use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. So right mouse button pan, scroll wheel zoom in and out. You can select nodes by just clicking on them or holding down the left mouse button to marquee select. Now to the left right here is the viewport. If you hold down the left mouse button, you can pan around this preview mesh right here, which helps us see our material when we're editing it. Now we can change the preview mesh down here. So maybe you want to use a cylinder or a flat plane, a square, but for now I'm just going to keep it at a sphere. And right below that is the details panel. So if we select a node, we're able to edit that node's properties right here in the details panel. So how do we create a node? Well, we come all the way over here to the palette, click on it, and now we have a selection of all the different nodes we can use to create a material. We can also right click anywhere to get that same palette. So under palette, I want a constant 3 vector under constant. The reason why is because a constant 3 vector is essentially Unreal's version of color.
All right, constant 3 vector? Yeah.
It's R, G, and B for red, green, and blue.
Itchy
right
ear.
now this node is set to black. I could edit it by coming to the details panel and double clicking on the color to get a color picker, or I could double click on the node itself to get that color wheel. So notice how when I do change the color right here, there are no changes. That's because its value is set to 0. I can bring up its value by clicking on this rectangle right here. So now when I change this color, we notice that color changing. And when I do like a color, I want to confirm that this node is going to stay that color by clicking OK. So now we have our first node with a new color. Essentially, if I hover over this pin right here and hold down the left mouse button, I'm able to drag out a wire. And I can choose where I want to place these wires in any of the inputs right here. Now, of course, because this is a color, it should probably go into base color. So with my left mouse button still held down, I'm going to hover over
and
the
it changes.
base color pin and let go to connect it. Now we can see that our color is affecting our material. So let's see what this looks like in our level. So press Control and Space, and let's drag first material onto the sphere, and notice that there are no changes right now. This looks like the default material.
Yeah, there we go.
That's because we first need to compile our material after we make any changes to see that change in our level. So go to first material, and to compile a material, you want to click on the apply button.
Apply.
And also while we're at it, let's save it so if Unreal crashes, we don't lose our progress. Now, if we come back to our level, we can see that change took effect. Now, jumping back into first material, if we, let's say, change the color to a light blue, jump back into our level, we see that there were no changes because we need to make sure after we edit a material that we compile it with the apply button.
Always
and
apply.
Now we see that light blue. That's how you add color. Now,
there
what
we
if
go.
you want to edit how shiny or reflective the material is? Well, under first material, instead of editing the base color, we're now going to edit the roughness channel right here.
Yeah, okay.
And roughness doesn't take a color value, of course. Instead, it takes a scalar value in between 0 and 1. So 0 means it's really smooth, and 1 means it's really rough. To get a scalar value, you want to come up to Palette, and under Constant, select the Constant 1 value. Left mouse button hold, and
hang on. Oh, adjustments constant. Is it constant one value? Yeah, cool.
Drag it out, and now we get a node that is simply a number. So 0 will be smooth, 1 will be rough. Let's make this really smooth by giving it a value of 0.1 and simply left mouse button hold and drag it into roughness. If for some reason you ever want to break a wire, all you have to do is hold down Alt and hover over any of these pins and left click. So Alt and left click to break any pins. And we will not see this change in our level unless we press apply. So jumping back into materials, I'm going to press F and hold down Alt and left mouse button to then pivot around my material, all its nice reflective values. Notice how we can see all the different clouds in the sky being reflected off the material now. So that's roughness, but what if we want to make our material metallic? Well, go back into first material, and this is where the metallic input comes in really handy. So we need another constant vector, and we could get it by selecting that node and pressing Ctrl and D to duplicate it, or I can get it from the palette, and of course I can right click and simply type in constant.
Cool.
So normally when I am getting nodes in, I just right click and type in the name of the node and press enter to bring it in. So I'm going to give this a value right now of 1. Since by default there is no metallic value, it's set to 0. So setting it to 1 and plugging it into metallic will make this blue pretty metallic. And in fact, let's go change the color to something orangey, press apply. And now we made a gold material. It's very important to point out that Unreal Engine's material system is based off of physically based rendering, or PBR for short. For example, right now I have a project
physical
open up to demonstrate PBR values, and the two main ones to know about are metallic and roughness. We've already played with them, and essentially both of them are on a scale from 0 to 1. Now by default, metallic is set to 0, so there is no metallicness on the material, and our roughness is set to 0.5. Now as I bring down the roughness, we see our material get shinier and shinier, and then if I bring it up, our material gets rougher and rougher. So if I bring it all the way down to 0 and play with the metallic value, which is right now as default value of 0, so it's not metallic, but slowly we can see it goes from a plastic material all the way to a very shiny gold material. And if we play with a roughness value, we can really see those changes.
Super smooth, super rough.
Effect. Now, both these values are clamped from 0 to 1. So let's say if we input a roughness value of -1, then it'll be clamped to 0. Or if we go above 1, then it's going to clamp it down to just 1. So keep that in mind that if you do try to input a value that's outside the 0 to 1 range, you won't see any changes. And it's important to point out that generally for metallic values, we never go in between 0 and 1. You won't really see a material that's 0.5 metallic. Instead, materials are either all the way 0 or all the way 1. Here I am back in our original project, and you notice that we no longer have our material opened up here. Well, that's fine. You can always open up the material on any object by clicking on that object, and then in the details panel, we see all the materials that are currently on top of that object. So just double click to open up our original material we created. Alternatively, you'll see a little magnifying icon right there. If I select that, then it's automatically going to jump to that material's location in our content drawer.
Cool.
And we can double click to open it up right there like that. So the PBR sliders we were just playing with are the metallic and roughness values right here. So those sliders correspond with these values. So hopefully you understand exactly what they do now.
Yeah, I think with like materials, like doing the finer tuning, get more into it down the track. But I think having the kind of basic understanding is a good thing. I think I'll probably spend a lot more time lighting and everything when I was to begin with, and using defaults.
Now I'm going to make a slight edit. So for metallic, let's bring it from 1 to its default value of 0. So that's how it's kind of like a plastic material right now. And also, I think it's a little bit too bright. So double clicking on the color, I'm able to decrease the brightness by playing with its value. So bring it down a little bit, press OK, press apply. And now I do think we have a nice material, but normally when you have plastic outside, it wouldn't be this uniformly shiny. You would expect dirt to pile on this material and make some areas of the material rougher than others.
Yeah.
So let's jump into first material. And to add a texture, press Control and space. Let's go into starter content. Since starter content comes with a bunch of textures under the textures folder, and the texture I want to use is specifically T_Perlin noise. So to get a
T_Perlin noise. T. Alright, yeah, so what's he doing?
texture into your material, simply left mouse button and hold, drag it in, and let go like that. Alternatively, you can right click, type in texture sample, select that, and then within the details panel, in the drop down of texture, go ahead and find whatever texture you want to
okay,
use
cool.
and select it. So that's alternative way to add in a texture. And now that we have T_Perlin noise, if we open it up, we can see that it's just black and white. All the pixels of the texture represent a value in between 0 and 1. So they are perfect to plug into either metallic or roughness. Plug our texture into roughness since I wanted to drive the roughness value of our material.
Alright, so roughness.
And delete the old node since I no longer need it.
So
Press
don't
apply,
need that one.
drop it back into our material example. And now if I angle it with the sun, and here's a nice tip, if I hold down Control and L at the same time, I'm able to rotate that sun. So I'm able to bring it down, like move it around, and see what our material looks like in different lighting scenarios. And right now, our material is looking a lot more realistic. We can see that because of our material, all the black spots represent shiny areas, and all the white spots represent rough areas, which gives our material a nice smudgy look to it.
Nice.
To just break up that uniform shininess. At this point, let's switch up the colors. Since if I go into color mode by going Alt-3 for unlit, we can see that's still all one uniform color. Pressing Alt-4 to go back into lit mode, I want it where all the smudges are a different color that's a little bit more brown than orange to represent dirt. So let's go back into first material.
Yeah.
And we can duplicate this by pressing Control and D, or we can right click and type in constant 3 vector and select that. So double click on this. I'm going to give it a brownish color, maybe like right here, press OK. And now I want to lerp in between the orange color and the brown color, depending on our alpha texture. So wherever there's white, I want it to pick brown, and whenever there's black, I want it to pick orange.
Hang on.
And we could
How did he get brown? Yeah, if we do that, okay. So what are we doing?
pick orange. And we could do this through a linear interpolate node. So right click, type in. So let's go back into first material.
Yeah, okay.
And we can duplicate this by
Too
pressing
far back,
Control
yep.
and D, or we can right click and type in constant 3 vector and select that. So double click on this. I'm going to give it a brownish color, maybe like right here, press OK. And now I want to lerp in between the orange color and the brown color, depending on our alpha texture.
Yeah, okay.
So wherever there's white, I want it to pick brown, and whenever there's black, I want it to pick orange. And we can do this through a linear interpolate node.
Yeah,
So
okay.
right click, type in linear, and then interpolate, select that. Or a shortcut is to hold down the L key and left click. So L left click brings in the lerp node, since we are going to be using that node a lot. And on the subject of hotkeys, if I hold down 3 and left click, that gives us a constant 3 vector for color. Or if I hold down 1,
I'll get to
and left
hotkeys
click,
one day.
that gives us a basic scalar value, like for metallic and roughness. So 1 and left click for scalar value, 3 and left click for color. So let's plug this up to A, plug the brown one to B, and for alpha texture, I want it to lerp depending on our original mask that's right now driving our roughness. So drag RGB into alpha, and drag that all into base color.
Yeah,
And now we can see.
So he's doing. Hey, what did he do? He's got A to B, and then RGB to alpha. And then he's done that to base color. There we go. Okay.
See that where
There we go. There we go.
The color changes to a dirty brown. Pressing apply, jumping back in here, we notice that our material is definitely a lot more realistic. You can imagine that this was once plastic or really shiny paint, and over time dirt has slowly started to build up on the material, making it pretty dirty. Now we can make this even better by, instead of lerping in between two colors, we're lerping in between a color and another texture. So there's a very good texture under starter content textures.
Yeah, starter content.
And it is right here. So it's T.
Hang on. Starter content. Textures. T metal rust.
Underscore metal rust. Open this up. We can see what it is. But right now we don't notice anything. That's because the alpha channel is turned on and the alpha channel handles opacity. So if you ever open up a texture and you don't see anything, make sure you come up to A and uncheck that. So now we can see it. And while this is rust, I do think it functions well as.
What have I done? Okay. T. Metal rust. Turn off A.
As dirt, especially for a very small detail. Like on this material, it's going to be hard to tell that this is rust instead of dirt. So let's drag this onto our material graph and plug it up right there instead of the original dirt and press apply.
Right.
So congratulations, you just made
that one there, T-metal rust. And where are we going?
Made your first material. Be back in here. We notice that our material is definitely a lot more realistic. You can imagine that this was once plastic or really shiny paint.
Are we going
dirt has slowly started to build up on the material, making it pretty dirty. Now we can make this even better by, instead of lerping in between two colors, we're lerping in between a color and another texture. So there's a very good texture under starter content textures. And it is right here. So it's T underscore metal rust. Open this up. We can see what it is. But right now we don't notice anything. That's because the alpha channel is turned on and the alpha channel handles opacity. So if you ever open up a texture and you don't see anything, make sure you come up to A and uncheck that. So now we can see it. And while this is rust, I do think it functions well as dirt. Especially for a very small detail. Like on this material, it's going to be hard to tell that this is rust instead of dirt. So let's drag this.
Drag it up
onto our material graph.
Yep.
And plug it up right there instead of the original dirt.
Okay, so you do it into
congratulations, you just made your
into B. So I want that to go there. And then I want that to go there. All right, sweet. Cool beans.
first material in Unreal Engine 5. While it's not the best, it definitely is a good introduction to the power of the material graph. Before we continue, we first have to download some free assets I created for this tutorial to help us learn Unreal Engine. You can find a...
So yeah, I think that's where we'll probably leave it for tonight. Well, that's kind of 50 minutes. I'm kind of keeping these live streams to kind of 45, 50 minutes. Yeah, so that's materials done. Um, yeah, so post-processing, camera and exposure and materials. So textures, material parameters and instances, and mask materials. So we've got a fair chunk of like bits and pieces that we've got to do, which I'll kind of jump on to tomorrow. So that's where we kind of sit. I probably forget a lot of this. But yeah, keep on coming back to it. But anyway, that is that for tonight. So thank you all for getting this far. Muchly appreciated. Yeah, I will hopefully be back. If I'm not back tomorrow night, I'll be back on Monday. Just set easy into these streams. By means to get this far, thank you for hanging out. I did not speak that much tonight, kind of just following along. But anyway, such is life. Such is where we kind of set up. But yeah, we'll get better. We'll get it under control. I just want to get through this kind of I think this tutorial, and I might do one other one, and then we'll get into some of our own stuff. So yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But until next time, guys, again, thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It'd be greatly appreciated. Like, comment, all that type of stuff. Muchly appreciated. And yeah, over the weekend, kind of recap video should be coming out. So keep an eye out for that. Until the next time, guys, take it easy. Ciao for